So this is my thesis defense for PD-1 blockade with regards to PD-L1 expression. Next slide. These will just be my context. I'll be going over the introduction, literature review, methodology and results, and conclusion. Next slide. So these are just some of the questions I have as of right now, specifically because I was mainly looking at lung cancer as a whole. This was one of my first exposure to it. So first I was trying to identify key characteristics. How does the swift metastasis of lung cancer contribute to the challenges faced by clinicians? What is the role of genetic mutations, both inherited and adopted from the environment, in affecting lung cancer? And also, what are the limitations of current treatments, and how does PD-1 blockade specifically aid in treatment? Next slide. So in the literature review, when 40 patients were exposed to mono-PD-L1 therapy, we witnessed how different brands of anti-PD-L1 immunotherapy methods could combat stage 4 lung cancer. Now, just for context, PD-1 is a protein on the surface of immune cells. Its natural role is to regulate the immune response. In the context of cancer, specifically lung cancer, tumors can exploit the PD-1 pathway by expressing PD-L1, known as programmed death ligand 1, which interacts with PD-1 to inhibit the immune response. So right here, what they're examining is how this interaction and this key immune checkpoint pathway can be regulated by the immune system. And we use treatments such as pembrolizumab and nivolumab, which was used in this specific trial, in order to disrupt this interaction and restart T-cell activity. So what they observed was that with high PD-L1 expression of 50% or higher, survival is shown to be 20 to 14%, compared to the 7 to 12% expressed in patients with only 10 to 12% active PD-L1. So this takes into account, of course, genetic mutation, race risk variability, as people of color are more commonly exposed to lung cancer and have symptoms develop faster, and predisposed genetic variability to mutation. So these mutations, of course, include the epidermal growth factor receptor, EGFR, which can activate differently in people just based on genetics. Now, qualitatively, recovery was faster and more efficient for people who use PD-1 alongside other equally uninvasive treatments. So we're talking CAR therapy and other forms of immune therapy, when we're comparing this with patients who are exposed to more severe treatments. Next slide. So methodology and results, I consulted various medical databases, various research papers, and I wanted to examine not only data from clinical trials, but also focus on the response rates. How are they doing after being checked up upon? There's a lot of long-term clinical trials I consulted. And with the results, PD-1 blockade was very successful in how it facilitates the activation and proliferation of cytotoxic T cells. So what they're doing in a lot of these experiments is they're not only analyzing just the qualitative results, they're also like examining blood cells, they're taking the blood work, and what they're observing is that the PD-1 blockade is in fact restoring the activity of T cells. This includes people with KRAS mutations, which are often found in like non-small cell lung cancer, that the proteins will just uncontrollably just cell divide even after treatment. And what they're finding is that the PD-1 blockade is effectively retraining the immune system to increase that activity of T cells in that like microenvironment. So even in the long term, the immune system is prepared to combat the cancer or any way it mutates. Next slide, please. So this is just my first part of the conclusion, just to answer the questions. The swift metastasis, that's because the lungs have a rich vascular and lymphatic network. So this is basically providing multiple routes for the cancer cells to disseminate. With the role of genetic mutation, as aforementioned, the EGFR mutations, the KRAS mutations, these are all things that are not only caused by just smoking or exposure to smog and even carcinogens in the environment, but can be affected by natural blood work. That's something I definitely want to look into in the future. With the approaches to breakthroughs and treatment strategies, PD-1 has been used for a while, but it's now being used like in conjunction with other therapies, which is still very common, but that has many ways to go. With regards to limitations of current treatments, it's just most treatments besides PD-1 are very toxic, but they're also the most accessible. So even if we're using PD-1 blockade alongside just the regular chemotherapy or radiation therapy, they're still great drawbacks. And the significance of PD-1 blockade, as mentioned, it restores the activity of T cells. It's an effective biomarker, and it can help train the body to just be more receptive to cancer cells, while also, given the biomarker, being able to predict where it will go. But this isn't very constant. That's something I definitely want to look into. And the implication of the PD-1 blockade is that it is very effective and will definitely be used alongside many other forms of immunotherapy. Next slide, please. So yeah, in the future, this trial bears very good news. However, I would like to have a better understanding of how different types of driver mutations in non-small cell lung cancer specifically affect patients' responses. I'm saying this only because when I was looking through a lot of the trials, there was mentions of non-small cell lung cancer, but there wasn't that much data, especially with regards to driver mutations, which is critical in not only how the tumors themselves develop, but how they spread. Because as I mentioned, the lymphatic system within the lungs connects everywhere. So just it can like turn into different types of cancers. And I want to study more on that in effect with the driver mutation. And of course, it can help physicians tailor treatments more specifically to individual patients. But this is based on their own mutations in tumor biology. I would like to see more research done on cancer vaccines, which I know are being investigated currently with regards to their effect on the mRNA cells and how they respond to tumors. But I want to see how that could potentially be used alongside PD-1 blockade, because I know vaccines are obviously very experimental right now, but that's definitely something I want to examine more in future research and studies. Next slide, please. So yeah, just one last thing I want to say is just the gifted Gabber team. I'm greatly appreciative for all their service and all their help. Dr. Prahlad he provided sources for expansion of research while also focusing my current argument. He helped find what was wrong within my current statement as well as my thesis, and also helped me expand. He provided resources for me to consult in order to focus my argument while also making sure that I was maintaining a good, strong basis of information to make sure my point was being driven across carefully. And as to Dr. Virgil, equally important, he aided in my word choice, my phrasing, my framing of my argument, as well as my source work. I definitely needed some help with APA source. It was very new to me. I was only using MLA basically up to this point. And he made sure that my argument was able to maintain a formal tone while also being accessible to the general public. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Awesome. Great job, Pranav.